effective governance, stability, and long-term district success. Yes, budgets and superintendent evaluations sit at the heart of effective governance, stability, and your long-term success as a board member and a superintendent. At HYA, our work across the country gives us a uniquely comprehensive lens into what truly moves systems forward. Through thousands of engagements, deep research, and hands-on experience with boards and superintendents nationwide, we really are able to blend evidence-based practice with real-world lessons that we have learned from the field, supporting district leaders in ways that few other organizations can. And so it is our really pleasure to be here to be able to talk to all of you about what we know and what we've learned. Today, you're going to hear a lot about alignment and structure, and that's intentional. What we know over and over again through all of our engagements is that there is tremendous freedom and liberation when structure exists. When protocols are clear, when expectations are shared, and when policy is aligned, everyone, the board, the superintendent, and all of his or her direct reports can operate with confidence and purpose and trust. So our hope is that today you leave reflecting on the structures and agreements that may be missing in your district and how the absence of those structures really leaves governance, progress, stability, and even leadership longevity up to chance. I'm Nanci Perez, and I'm the president of HYA, and I'm grateful for your time today and for your commitment to strong governance. It is our mission to improve public schools across America. We are excited to continue elevating this thought leadership in the field through our webinars and our academies, and in the collaborative work that we do with all of you and our clients across the nation. Today, we bring two distinguished associates to the field. Richard McGregory is going to introduce himself, and Adam Lechnir, both of them working currently in this arena of board and superintendent collaboratives and really understanding the key issues that are at stake for your success and the success of districts in the ultimate pursuit of increased achievement for every child. Unfortunately, today, Carlton Jenkins could not be with us, but he will be on future webinars should you choose to come back to future sessions in this collaborative. And so at this time, I'm really excited to turn it over to Adam and Richard, who are going to illuminate this topic today for all of you and hopefully give us a whole lot to think about in ways that we can immediately act. So thank you today for joining, and I'll turn it over to Adam and Richard.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Richard McGregory. I am a former chief of staff in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I'm hoping to be able to share with you some of my perspectives based on not only my career in K-12, but also in previous work that I've also done in higher education and as a researcher. This is a very important topic, and I am so thankful to be able to discuss this and lead this discussion working with Adam. And so I'll let Adam take over from there.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Dr. Perez, and thank you all for joining us today. It's as I was scanning who is coming in, we really do have districts kind of represented from all over the country today. Really great to be with you. As mentioned, I'm Adam Lechnir. I'm an associate here at HYA. On the screen is a little bit more about my background, but as Nanci kind of queued us up, is really the success around budgets and superintendent evaluations really center on alignment and structure. And that's really what my background is. It's the work I do at HYA, working with school boards across the country, is help boards and superintendents build those structures. I've had a lot of success doing that, leading teams through budgets and superintendent evaluation. So really great to be here. I should also say my voice is a little hoarse. I am based in Chicago, where it is currently snowing and cold. So apologies if my voice is a little hard to hear, but always happy to follow up with any needed clarification. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. So we want to start today's conversation, and we do want it to be a conversation. We're going to be, this is a process where we're going to be incorporating your input throughout today's conversation. But we've structured this around areas that reflect where school boards and superintendents we work with often need greater clarity and coordination with respect to budgets and evaluations, right? As many of you may know, these are kind of two of some of the most important tools, leadership tools, really, that a board and superintendent have to, as Dr. Perez said before, right, drive alignment and drive impact for the district. And yet, time again, when Richard and I and our colleagues at HYA are working with school boards and superintendents, we find that these processes often need that clarity and often need better structures in place to run successfully. So we're going to start with two critical, we'll talk about why implementing these two systems really well can be sometimes a challenge for school boards and school districts. This will kind of ground us in some of the underlying issues that kind of show up very visibly in these two processes. After that, Richard and I are going to share some practical strategies that we've employed, that we put in school boards across the country that we've seen work. Things like clarity of roles and responsibilities, processes, and alignment. And then throughout today's conversation, we'll see how all these systems work together. Your evaluations, your budgets, your strategic plan, because that's really the magic. That's really where all of this kind of flows and stems from. But as I said, we want to be interactive, and that's how we'll start. We want this to be useful for you. We want this for you to be able to take this back to your district, something that you can start right away, because we know, this work is really challenging. It's often a thankless job, and especially right now with a lot of uncertainty at the federal, state, and even local levels. And our aim, honestly, with any presentation that we do, any conversation that any of us at HYA have, is to be your thought partner, to be a support for you. And that's really what our ultimate goal is here today, is to be a thought partner for you anywhere you're at in your journey. So for that, I'm going to turn this over to Jen Duncan, our HYA director, who's going to facilitate an interactive piece. Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so I have a couple prompts we're going to be sharing out throughout the meeting. We have 4 in total. And then keep in mind our chat is also open. So if anything comes to mind throughout the presentation, feel free to comment or ask questions in there. And if we don't end up addressing them during the meeting, we can always follow up via email. So that's there too. So our first prompt is being launched now. You should see it on your screen. How well aligned is your strategic plan, superintendent evaluation, personnel evaluation, and budget? We have a scale of 0 to 5 here. 0 not aligned at all the way to 5 extremely aligned.
Personnel evaluation, meaning all other administrators, your cabinet, your principals.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Usually leave these open for about 1 minute, so about 30 more seconds if you could take to think about your response and submit. Okay, looks like most of our answers are in, so I'm going to end the poll and share what we learned. Share results. Can you see the results now?
Yep, I'm able to see it.
Okay, great. So there you go. We can see quite a range.
Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting, right? It kind of runs the gamut in terms of how aligned strategic plan is to your evaluation systems and your budget processes. And Richard, I'd love to hear from you, but that's kind of what we hear too, right? When we work with districts and do kind of our initial assessments, people are kind of at different parts of their journey with respect to these two areas. Richard, I'll turn it over to you for some reflections.
Yeah. I'll say that The results
Classic bell curve. Yeah. Sorry.
show that everyone
Yeah.
is all over the place in different places. Also, important thing to know is that we don't have all of our responses being a 5. And when that's the case, that means that there's more work to be done. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of that work that needs to be done as we go through today.
Yeah, exactly right. And I wish we had more time. I would love to hear like exactly what's not aligned, but I suppose that's for a follow-up conversation. And kind of let's talk about this alignment piece. Before I do that, Jen, do you mind? Can you bring? Oh, okay. Thank you. Um, all right. So budgets and evaluations, right? They sit within a larger, what I refer to as kind of a leadership system, right? Anchored in values, anchored in your strategic plan. And those two systems, budgets and evaluations, they're refined through very iterative, kind of learning driven cycles, as kind of indicated here on the slide. The strongest districts that we worked with, where there's kind of a high degree of collaboration between school boards and superintendents, really treat the budgets and evaluations as part of kind of a year-long process where there's alignment, aligning, you're learning, you're calibrating, you're repeating. Everything's still anchored in your goals, your strategic plan, the story that you're trying to tell as a team, but you're learning as you go. And so if you see those kind of arrows on the screen, what that's meant to indicate is like, if you are doing this well, your impact grows over time because you're taking the information that you're learning each year, updating those KPIs as necessary, but continuing on that journey. But where we see this most successfully is that there's kind of the through line of goals, community values, KPIs into the implementation side, and implementation plans, budgets, evaluation. So we see decision making, right, that is clearly aligned to goals. We see community engagement, where we're continually sort of anchoring on those community values. The decisions that we're making are anchored on those community values and the vision we're setting. Evaluations. It's very clear in successful evaluations, a through line from school improvement sites and school improvement plans to department level strategic plans to the superintendent evaluation and personnel evaluation systems as a whole. They all sort of work in sync. And they're connected to, driven by, informed by the priorities as sort of articulated in your strategic plan. And remember, right, successful strategic plans done well are really anchored in community values. They're anchored in through really robust community engagement, student voice, families, et cetera. So this is what good looks like. Yet, right, we know just based off of the experience, that the question that Jen just asked is, districts kind of run the gamut in terms of where they're at in these processes. So in theory, this is how we work. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about, well, why isn't this always the case? What's happening? For that, I'm going to turn this
question
over.
first came in. We had a
yes.
question that just came in about where does student achievement data come in this? And so when you think about the story that everybody should be talking about, right, from the board to the principals to the superintendent, that was developed. That story of where you're going was developed from community input, right? All kinds of work that was done to develop the strategic plan. Those strategic plans usually have, we've never seen one that doesn't, some sort of student achievement goal. And that data is represented in the KPI, the key performance indicator, of which the board has decided is going to track whether or not you're making improvement on that goal of increased student achievement. And so that could be more enrollment in AP courses. That could be a graduation rate. That could be growth on standardized test scores. It could be several KPIs. Those then, in the alignment piece, annually are part of the implementation plan that you're doing as a superintendent through your personal goals, that your principals are doing through school improvement, right? And those action plans that your departments are doing through their department improvement plans. Those are all just the action plans of the strategic plan. Those are the implementation plan. And so once those are set, now do you fund those initiatives, those implementation plans? Do you fund those school improvement initiatives, but that are linked to the strategic plan and moving those KPIs. Therein comes the evaluation. So in the question of, well, where does student achievement data come in? It's absolutely one and usually many KPIs, and therefore needs to be part of the implementation plans or the strategic plans that you're putting in place that are different from school to school, but are all seeking to achieve and grow that KPI, and that ultimately you'll be evaluated on. I hope that answers the question.
And as we go to the next slide, I know there was a question that came in about, oh, I think we went too far. There we go. As we got the question about the what happens if there's misalignment? Well, we know what Adam shared and what Nanci talked about is the ideal state, is how it should be. But we also have to realize that there are pain points that often get in the way of your successful board superintendent collaboration. One pain point comes in the form of leadership turnover. If you have frequent turnover, it's accompanied by shifting expectations, priorities that change, budgets that are inconsistent with your mission, and this all hinders your progress. The role complexity of board members also complicates because board members deal with a lot of external matters that increase the complexity of their role. And when that happens, it's harder to set clear goals that guide the budget and the evaluation. We all know that there are a lot of influences that happen. So we think about the board relationship. That relationship isn't in its own cocoon. It's being impacted by external forces. And if your team does not have truly shared goals, if you're not truly aligned, then the individual requests, the one-offs, the external pressures will start to drive decisions and force decision-making that becomes more reactive than proactive. And of course, we have the issue of trust. If trust is absent, faltering, or fragile, or the vision of the board and the superintendent is fragmented, then this evaluation process of the superintendent changes from an objective process that is really about alignment and district improvement to a subjective process that also then is impacted by the political winds that keep shifting. And so all of these pain points address and talk about the ways that you can become misaligned. These pain points also will show up during your budget and superintendent evaluation season if you're not tight in these different areas. With that, we're going to go to Jen. She has another question for us.
And before we do that question, I got a couple more things that came in from the chat, right? The first question, thank you, Terry. How do you address and achieve meaningful outcomes if the school board and community are misaligned despite taking all the information you have discussed? Well, going back to that slide right before this, if you could do that, Richard, you know, the point of the strategic plan is those community values were taken into consideration. And at some point, the board, the elected representative of the community, decided what the goals were and what the strategic plan is. And that is the story and that is the roadmap. So for example, as a superintendent, when looking at your principal school improvement plans, they shouldn't be working on things that are not the goals of the strategic plan and the KPIs, right? If the principals are working with their parent teacher organization, for example, and they come up with, you know, well, we want to increase fine arts enrollment, and that's not a goal in the strategic plan, they can redirect them and say, actually, our job is to personalize for our building what it means to move the district overall in these areas. So again, that structure actually provides some liberty to say no. Also, how many of you have had a board member come back from a conference and say, hey, I learned about this and we got to do this? You're able to say, we can talk about adding that to the strategic plan when the next one is up in a year, 2 years. Right now, we are focused on this and the KPIs that we decided will measure whether or not we're successful at driving growth through our strategic plan. Many of them said, you know, it's important, Christine Hill, to work with the board to establish metrics in advance. That's why that's part of the story. The KPI is part of the stories. Yes, they get updated every year, but that's part of the story that's developed at the time of the strategic plan and only are changed every 3 to 5 years, depending on how long your strategic plan is. Excellent point, Christina. Also, Daniel said, just a suggestion regarding key performance indicators, keep your targets realistic. We do a whole session on KPIs. Some of our clients, their most difficult pain point is figuring out what are really good KPIs and how to actually decide what they should be, working with the board, the superintendent, the team. So, excellent point. Um, Also, Nicole talked about SMART goals, right? SMART goals really can be more of the goals as that are part of the implementation plans. They're not really those big KPI goals that are really driving the overall direction of the district. Now, a question for either Adam or Richard. Leadership turnover, especially at the superintendent level, is such a barrier to progress. You just talked about this, Richard. Do board members get training on this so they can think critically before turning over the superintendent again and again?
Well, I will share from my perspective and my experience. There are always at different conferences discussion about the process of hiring superintendent. However, in that discussion, it's also limited in terms of how much true practical tactical knowledge you get on how to avoid running into the same dilemmas that caused the last superintendent tenure to be short. And really, boards need to have a common understanding with their superintendents and work together if they're going to deal with that issue of limiting the turnover. The turnover is not just a measure of the superintendent's effectiveness. It's a measure of the whole system's effectiveness. It's a measure of the alignment, and it's a measure of how the board and superintendent were able to take those community values and have a true shared vision and shared agreement on how we're going to get to that vision and how we're going to monitor that vision. But I'll let Adam go from there.
Well, I was sort of reflecting on the questions and how much in the subsequent slides we're going to be covering some of this. So it's like everyone is kind of beating to the punch, and I think it's great. I think that the question around soup evals, in my experience, boards need a lot more training in this. When we talk about the leadership turnover, and we'll talk about this actually in a couple slides around one of the main challenges we see in superintendent evaluations, but we're the average board member, right, has not had actual formal training in the evaluation of an executive. An executive, by the way, of one of the largest, if not the largest, most complex organization in their communities. And yet we expect them to do it well, right? Trust erodes over time if you don't do it well. In fact, up on the screen, the leadership turnover, right? Superintendents turn over in large urban school districts every 3 years. Even more often, depending on the demographic profile. Boards, by the way, are also turning over. So this year with elections, next year, another set of elections, every 2 years you have different priorities. And so things are constantly shifting. And to the question of like, do they get training? I mean, honestly, that's why we're doing this today. That's why this is the second series in our webinar. We have another one coming in March. We have planned all year, but it's why I do this work. It's why Richard does it. It's why we all do this work. It's because everyone needs more training. People want training in our experience. And that's why we're doing this. But I wonder if we can jump to a few slides here so that we get through some of the other presentations, because I actually think to the point about clarity of metrics, that's exactly where we're going, is you need to be clear up front on all of this. Don't even start these processes until you have clarity up front about what you're actually doing. And actually, to that point, let's get into to budgets. Right, some of you already named this around some complexities around budgets, but just to kind of take a step back. Yes. Oh, Jen, yes.
It's about budget, so let's
do it. Yeah.
off. So this one is, does your board have a shared understanding of how the budget connects to the goals in your strategic plan? We have yes, mostly, not really, or no. Give it about 30 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll because our responses are kind of at a standstill. We've got 70%. So I'm going to end and share. Now you can see the results.
Look at that. So nearly half of those polled and responded say not really or no. Pretty insightful. Not surprised just based off of our own experience, but I do think um, this is why it's so critically important that we're talking about this topic today. I mean, most of you are in the middle of or starting your budget development process. That's why we're doing this today. But Richard, before I talk a little bit more about the slide, I want to turn it over to you.
Yeah. It's always been interesting. We talk about, as we talk about the issue with the budget and the training of the board members. We also know that just like superintendent's turnover, CFOs of school districts turnover. Some estimates say that they turn over as often as in 3-year cycles. And so as the superintendents are coming in, sometimes being new, board members are new. They're dealing with either someone who is at the end of a short tenure or someone who's just started a short tenure. So all of that talks about the need for further training, for further understanding the alignment issues. And we also note too that the budgets are a statement of your values. However, as Adam will share, there's a limited amount of wiggle room within the budgets to deploy resources to get to those values because a lot of things are fixed. And so, it is not surprising that some board members lack some of this knowledge. The knowledge grows as they're on the board for longer, but just like we see in increasing turnover from superintendents, we're also seeing increasing turnover from board members. Even if you look at the headlines, more and more cases of board members getting to only half of their term and throwing their hands up in the air and walking away. So all of those things impact this process. But I don't want to take all of what Adam has on the page, so I'll turn it back over to you.
By all means, we're getting right to it, and I love it. I'm watching the chat, so I'm going to try to respond to some of it, but if I don't, feel free to chime in and ask. You know, I'm going to take down the poll for me. What we just said, right? Like budgets they're leadership tools, and done well, they translate their value statements, as Richard just mentioned. They're translating your goals into commitments, really, that are needed to drive the progress that you want to see, as articulated in your strategic plan, those goals, those outcomes. But what's coming up in the questions, what we're naming, right? The high level here is like, what we often see, though, is aligning budgets with board members, with our community. It is extremely difficult work because the conditions around which you are developing that budget require like a super high degree of collaboration and coordination, right? You need clarity, you need collaboration, you need coordination to really sustain your strategic plan, to really sustain the investments that are needed to realize the goals that you set out to achieve, right? So some of these are on the screen. I won't go through all of them, but there's just constant volatility, right? New unfunded mandates from the state, enrollment declines, staffing shortages, a big one, inflation right now. All of these are kind of shifting, at the same time, as Richard just mentioned, you have board members coming in mid-cycle who are, operating on the prior year budget and who may have their own thing to want to invest in. But really, the scale and complexity of a budget period is a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around. It's why, in our experience, we see that it takes 2 or 3 years for board members to really kind of get comfortable and put the pieces together. But as we just experienced, right, in the pain points, the average, we're seeing a lot of turnover, not just with superintendents, with board members as well. Nearly half of the 80,000 seats that are up for election this year, next year, might be replaced by new board members. And so you kind of just get in this continuous churn, this cycle. So it's difficult even for highly functioning school board and superintendent collaborations. But the point here, right, with the challenges is that most of them, a lot of them can be explained with kind of underlying broader leadership pain points. It's how those pain points that we just talked about show up in a process that really requires a high degree of coordination and collaboration. It's extremely visible too, as you all know. The public sees it. And you start to see fractures if people aren't aligned early and often. So these are some of the challenges. For the next slide, we'll talk a little bit of some of the challenges in the superintendent evaluation process. But before that, I want to turn it again back to Jen, who's going to facilitate another interactive piece so we can get to learn a little bit more about your perspective with respect to superintendent evaluations.
All right, so our third question here is being launched now. How clear are the roles of the board and superintendent expectations, goals, and measures used in your superintendent evaluation process? We have very clear, somewhat clear, or no clear being not clear. About 10 more seconds. All right. Here we have our results for that one.
Yeah, I would love to, if we had the time, do a follow-up question about what is it clear, what makes it clear, and is there a through line with your strategic plan and the goals? Because that's really sort of what connects a really strong superintendent evaluation system. But I think, similar to the other questions, we're kind of seeing mixed results, but quite a few folks where they're somewhat clear or really not clear at all. Richard, any other?
92%. I mean,
Yeah.
92% do not know exactly how they're going to be evaluated.
And this is
That's
the job of a board, right? Like this is
Yep.
one of the most important functions of a board. In my experience, I am not surprised, but this is why we're spending time on this today. We know
Yeah.
that it takes a lot more thoughtful planning around this. But Richard, yes.
Yeah. So let's advance the slide and let's get into it about why
Yeah.
evaluations are difficult for school board
Oh,
superintendent
sorry about that.
collaboration. Oh,
Clicked the wrong one. I apologize.
so Adam mentioned before that board members aren't always doing in their day-to-day work, in their job, evaluating CEOs of large, complex organizations. Sometimes board members aren't educators; they're community members, right? So they're new to evaluations often, or sometimes if they're familiar with evaluations, they're not used to evaluating CEOs of educational enterprises. That gets compounded by there often aren't standard written templates for evaluating a superintendent, right? Now, you can talk to a few places that do some work in the area. They'll tell you, hey, these are some things we have, but oftentimes those one size fit all pieces don't work for particular districts. There's also lack of clarity about expectations, right? Oftentimes you're saying, well, what's the real criteria, right? And oftentimes, even if you have criteria for the evaluation, it may differ from the criteria you used when you hired the superintendent, right? So then a question is, what data should we really use? What artifacts will provide the evidence that we need, right? And all of this is driven by often inconsistency and inflexibility in the calendars, right? you need to get a superintendent evaluation done by a certain time. That's often in the board regulations and what have you, right? But that timeline doesn't always fit with the school calendar, with the calendar from the state to release data, with the federal calendar to release achievement data. And so the question many board members have had in my experience is, what is the actual timeline we need to be doing versus the stated timeline that we have versus the ideal timeline? And then often there's a level of frustration. And when there's that type of frustration and you have any type of misalignment, right? Then we go back again to the evaluation process moving from objective to subjective. And then the personal and political factors come into play. And think about this. If you're the superintendent, you're trying to do the work of the board, right? But you have all of this inconsistency in how you're going to be evaluated, right? And then that makes your job less doable. And it also contributes to superintendents also looking around. They don't know if their evaluation will be a political versus an objective process, right? And all they know is that people are reaching out to them about the next job. And then sometimes it gets easier to do the next job if some of those alignment pieces are not addressed, than to stick with it and do that job even if you want to be there. Yeah, I see Adam shaking his head. I'll let Adam see if he wants to chime in before we move on.
No, I think you said it right. I think we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I think the theme here is like how much structure and process is needed to really run a successful superintendent evaluation process. But I would say often, in my experience, and perhaps some of you who responded to the poll earlier, what I often see is there's not enough training on like how to incorporate kind of foundational documents, not contracts, strategy, goals, and how to create a successful through line between those and a successful evaluation. And really, at the end of the day, it should never be a gotcha moment, right? This is a teamwork culture that boards should try to cultivate. And so no, Richard, I would just echo everything that you said. I would love I'm also following the chat too. Let's go to now let's shift gears. We want to kind of give some strategies from the field that we've seen work with respect to these two budgets, or these two topics, budgets and superintendent evaluations. Again, our hope is that you get something from this that you can take back to your own districts. But at the end, we'll share our contact information and we can have a subsequent conversation if needed. Again, right, at the center of your budget development is those shared goals that we've talked about. It's that story that you stand for, why you're leading the district, where you're leading the district. But to do that, to move that story forward, in my experience, you need at least three key ingredients. One, clarity of roles, who's doing what and by when. You need a structured process to kind of guide decision making. Talk about that in a minute. And then this really important piece, aligned messaging, messaging that stays consistent from kind of start to finish. Some of you are mentioning this in the chats around how do we create alignment with with our communities that we represent. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But thinking about role clarity, right? On the screen here, we have kind of a high level overview of what that looks like. But boards are really kind of setting that direction. Ideally, you already have a strategic plan in place. But when you start this budget development process every year, you're starting from a place of, okay, what are our goals? What are our priorities? And that's how you start the conversation around next year's budget development. Superintendents, right? You're coming with options. How are we aligning our budget to that kind of larger shared vision that the board has set? And ideally, you're coming with options and trade-offs, and we're having robust conversations early and often around if we make X investment, here's the trade-off that we'll see. And then keep in mind, remember that first graphic that we saw around what the ideal situation looks like. This is an iterative process. You have your strategic plan that's usually a 3 or 5 year out plan. And every year, this annual process, you're adjusting, you're calibrating, you're refining before the final decision is made. And then this last piece, super critical. What's the shared role? The shared role is really kind of telling that story. So once you kind of do the deep dives into the data for the current year, once you really, really dive into the scenario planning and the trade-offs, you need to be able to, in our experience, to do this successfully, have a very clear understanding of how exactly the budget is aligned to the strategic plan, because that's the story that you're going to be reiterating, right? Both the successes and some of the challenges, no doubt, but we need to be able to tell our communities, look, this is our big bets in our strategic plan. This is where our budget aligns. This is how we're resourcing it. It doesn't mean like other things aren't important. It just means that hey, right now these are our priorities that we're investing in to try to move the needle. But it is this shared piece that's really important, because in our experience, less effective collaborations, they lack one or more of these core things, whether it's clarity of roles or structured process, or aligned messaging. And one strategy I've seen, and Rich would love to hear a little bit from your experience as well, but is often when I go into boards, one of the first things I try to assess is, give me your governance calendar. How are you actually like planning out your monthly things, your quarterly things, your annual things? And with respect to budgets, often what I find is it's too compressed. If you think about it, to do the 3 things that I just named, that takes a long time. In my experience, it can take even 6 months or more, depending on the complexity of your budget and the organization. And so you really need to have a really refined, structured process. It's often year round, but it's longer, right? And it's thoughtful conversation between the superintendent, the cabinet, and the board about where are you currently at. And it's actually that part. We often kind of jump into the budget. It's often like a carryover from the previous year, but we really should be grounded in like, well, how well are we doing this year? Where are our dollars going? How well were those spent? So that we're doing that iterative process, so that we're taking what we're learning and making those adjustments as needed. And as Nanci mentioned before, kind of updating those KPIs in the strategic dashboard as necessary. So that's my 2 cents there, Richard. Would love to turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I love what Adam said about the governor's calendar. I think there needs to be 2 calendars. There's a governor's calendar with the board. There's also an accountability calendar with the superintendent dealing with the staff in the district. Both calendars should be working on the budget, but they should also be building in capacity building, because oftentimes not only is the board somewhat unfamiliar with how the budget works, but surprisingly, a lot of district leaders are not as familiar with how the budget works as they need to be. And so part of the role of the superintendent is also to advocate for mechanisms that build the capacity of both the board members they report to, and also of the people who report to them. So you have to have those calendars are critically important. The more people don't know, the more problematic the budget development process becomes. And a problematic budget development process will often show up in a problematic superintendent evaluation. With that, let's talk about the evaluation process, because there are roles also in the evaluation process. Again, the board sets the expectation. They approve the rubric, the weights, the goals, and evidence up front. They ground the expectations in the strategic plan and the priorities, but they have to ask themselves some questions. Not only do they ask themselves, are our expectations clear, fair, and aligned with our goals? Not only do they have to ask, do we all understand this rubric, the rates, weights, and the evidence? But a key question they have to ask themselves is, did we do our homework before the start of the evaluation timeline? Oftentimes, from my experience, board members come into the evaluation process as a blank slate, and they're just bringing in some perspectives from key community members that they talk to, and that's not the homework we're talking about. The superintendent has a role, not only proposing goals and the evidence, bringing these goals and artifacts aligned to the board priorities, but also the superintendent is providing these regular updates. You don't want surprises at evaluation time. In fact, most superintendents don't want there to be any surprises for the board because that turns a relationship toxic. Superintendent has to ask, do these goals align with your direction? And when the superintendent is asking about your direction from the board, really talking about how you have shared your mission and vision based on a strategic plan that represents the community values, as Nanci talked about. The superintendent also is asking, what other evidence do you need? And they're trying to ask that far enough in advance to provide it in a timely manner. But also the superintendent has to ask, did I do the advocacy role needed to align the board agenda setting, the investment of resources and time and money, and the other evaluation processes of district staff? Because the superintendent process should also be aligned with, superintendent evaluation process should also be aligned with the evaluation processes of the district administrators, right? It all should flow in the same direction, because if the superintendent has people who report to him or her working on things other than what the board is having the superintendent work on, you bringing in misalignment, right? The most important role, in my opinion, is also the shared role. And in a shared role, are you agreeing? Are you working together to run a fair, predictable process, following your calendar, right? Looking at your one set of goals, not these hidden goals, right? Having agreement on the data source. Are you treating the evaluation as a year-long process, not a one-time event? You're asking questions like, are our goals and data aligned in meetings, in evaluation? So we're talking about the KPIs, but does the board public sessions reflect talking about those goals, those KPIs, right? And we're continually asking together, is the process fair, predictable, and driving the work ahead? And as Adam talked about before, you really want to know, are we doing things in a way that avoid the gotcha moments that erode community trust? When the superintendent presents information that's almost like a gotcha for board members, that erodes community trust. When the board in the evaluation is doing gotcha moments for the superintendent, that erodes the trust of the community. And so you want to work together so you can avoid eroding the community trust. Then when you do that, everyone's doing these roles, you have a better chance for the evaluation process of the superintendent to be a process by which you're course correcting as a district, so you can get to your ultimate outcome, which is all of the things that are in your strategic plan. With that, let's go to the next piece about connecting all of this.
Mhm. Yeah, and I just building off of what Richard just mentioned, and I see a lot of the chats around the gotchas. One thing I was reflecting on some experience I've had working with clients and boards across the country. When you start your goal setting process and your performance evaluation process for superintendents, this is what this slide will conclude with, but like clarity up front. Everything should be named. Yes, those rubrics, the way, the process, the timeline, how you're doing it, how are you collecting this, and what is the actual tool that you're using? Because you really don't want surprises throughout and at the end. Someone was I see the discussion going back around like how often you should have check-ins. Like I think you should always have check-ins, as often as you can. And to Richard's point, making sure that there's structured processes for that. But it's clarity up front, and actually in both of these processes. So, budgets and evaluations, they really should tell, one unified story about your district's priorities, the story, what we led with earlier, your story. And it's really those shared goals as we have here in the middle, right? They're the anchor that kind of keeps both systems aligned. And a lot of what's going on in the discussion in the chats, right? Clarity has to come up front, not throughout, not at the end, not when decisions are made, right? Certainly not at the end of the year evaluation when there's surprises or when a board is about to vote on a budget and are first learning about some really key assumptions that were in that budget that are now coming out, right? All of this needs to come up front. But if you think about that, both the alignment on the goals and just the clarity up front, that alone takes a lot of time. So there was a lot of discussion around capacity building. You need the internal capacity to do this work. That's absolutely right. It's why often, right, in my own experience prior to working at HYA, we did this work. We had to actually build it into our calendars and even got outside support for some of this work. But the last piece here is alignment requires structure, right? Alignment requires structure, yearly planning, clear processes, as we just talked about, coordination and collaboration. Both of these processes really do require a high degree of coordination. When you go back to those pain points we talked about with the constant leadership churn that we're seeing, it becomes exponentially more difficult. So having structures in place really begins to create a governance culture where it's just kind of like a rhythm. It's like a thing you do throughout the year, yearly, quarterly, and monthly. Because these systems, they don't run smoothly without that intentional design. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Perez for some closing remarks before we open it up for Q&A in the 5 minutes that we have left. All right, Dr. Perez.
We had one more prompt.
Actually, I'm sorry, we have one more question. Thank you.
Let me share this prompt and then Nanci can take it away. So our last one is in one word, what's the hardest part to coordinate the budget and superintendent evaluation all year round? This one might take a bit more thought since we're asking for a one-word answer, so I'll leave it open for about a minute. All right, I'm going to end the poll just so we still have enough time for Nanci to conclude. So we did get 23 responses, and I will share the results.
Hey, Jen, I don't see the actual results, but do you mind just kind of giving an overview? I'd love to hear what the
I
audience said.
don't see them either, but now
Okay.
1 second. It's asking me to log in. Maybe let me get this sorted out, Nanci.
Okay.
You
We'll
can.
turn it over to Nanci. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. So, what I heard today, and as we close today's session, here is what we know. You can't leave this work up to chance. And you shouldn't navigate it alone. That's what we know. Strong governance and a healthy board superintendent partnership require intentional investment of time, which, one of the questions right now is what stands in the way? I replied with time and focus, just getting pulled away from all the daily things and then leaving this second. So that intentional investment in time, in the relationship, in the work, and investment in a skilled facilitator who serves almost like a chief of staff for the board. And whether that's us or someone else, I have never seen it work well without there being that intentional investment. Someone who helps keep the board focused aligned to its governance calendar, grounded in shared expectation, and really important, supported when the work gets complex and when the politics start bubbling up. You know, that level of structure and partnership is what sustains progress, and it is what protects stability. And so, you know, if HYA can support you in the journey, we're here to help. Please reach out. We know that everyone, as one of our participants just pointed out, in the system needs to be telling the same story, anchored to the same priorities, measured by the same metrics, from the superintendent to the principal. The work of every leader in every department and every decision must be aligned to the strategic plan. That's the only way you have a chance in hell of actually achieving anything. And the budgets must fund those strategies. And as one of our participants noted in the chat just now, all evaluations must reflect the same metrics and KPIs, but at different levels of the organization. And when evaluation, budget, strategy, and governance are all aligned, momentum becomes possible. And we have seen how systems can transform, how boards can work together in unison, even with very different political backgrounds, and how ultimately there can be an esprit de corps among an entire district that gets excited, from the staff member to faculty to administration to parents and community, when they actually see a story being told and a reality of increased achievement, increased community engagement, increased effort. There really is celebration. And so again, you know, it doesn't happen by accident. And I hope today you see that that structure and that planning and that those calendars and those protocols and those updates, that's what keeps everybody moving in the same direction. And therein lies actually liberty and freedom. And so I hope you invest in this intentionally. And I hope you think about some of the ways that you're already doing this work and already celebrate what you're doing, because so many of you in the responses today are doing this. In your chats, you clearly are already on this journey and well on your way of getting it and trying to do this. Maybe with that added piece of facilitation in place would help even more. And so let's take a look at the last poll and wrap it up for today.
So I sent a photo, a screenshot in the chat. Let's see. Adam, can you see that screenshot?
Oh yeah.
You scroll up.
So time is in the middle, and then you have all of the things that people talked about. Maybe you could share the screen. That's a great way to end. I really love this. If you can't, I can.
Yeah, I
do you want me to share?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do it. So I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to get to see this wonderful depiction of all the answers. And I think it's just great. So I hope you can see this. Let's wait till it comes up. Can you guys see it?
We see your web browser.
As Nancy's pulling that up, I can see it. Time and trust are the biggest and kind of at the center. I mean, that is like so crystal clear and like exactly what this is all about. It is hard to run either one of these systems, and frankly, to even get a shared vision if we don't have that trust, right? I think we talked about it earlier, but that's why you get in these cycles, these leadership turns. And the second part is this time. I will say time is really important, but I will say if you build in structures where you create space and save that space, protect the space to do this work with intention, I think you'll see how this stuff can kind of really turn around. What I would do, I know we are 2 minutes over, but like as a team, as a governing team, kind of take a step back and map out all the things related to governance, related to these processes, and make sure that you're hitting on them every month, right? some kind of milestone, some task oriented associated with either one. But you really need that thoughtful, intentional planning, just as you approach strategic planning. Same goes for these two topics. I know that
If
we're
you
three.
click on the, yeah, if you click on the
Go
little
ahead.
thing at the top where it says my screen, do you see that at the top after Adam Lechnir's screen, my screen? There's the word
I think we can all see it now, Nancy.
okay, great.
Yeah.
And what I love Christine Hill just said the word of the day is intentionality, and it's
Hmm.
so true. And I love the way that this did this because everyone, it's like time is at the center, but look at everything else. It's everything we talked about today, right? And I'll just say, when I look at things like politics, right? Um, it's important to recognize like there's nothing more political than first the federal government, second the state government. Third in line are public school districts. They are the most political organizations in America. And so give yourself a break, right? A little bit too, and recognize that you are dealing and you are working within as a board. If you're on here today as a board and as a superintendent, you're working in one of the most political environments, politically charged environments that exist. And unfortunately, in the last 5 years, have become the ground zero for playing out and arguing out these politics, these national politics. And so it's not easy, and I think that even speaks even more to the need for the kind of work that we talked about today, that kind of clarity and that focus. Okay. Any other comments? Such great chat today. Such great conversation. I know we didn't hear your voice, but we certainly heard it through the chat. It was really, really great. Those of you who asked for us to reach out to you, we certainly will do that and know that you can reach out to any of us. A simple way to do that is HYA@HYAsearch.com. We'll get it. Or, of course, you can email directly Adam or Gregory or me. I'm Nanci Perez at HYA.com. But HYA@HYA Search is easy to remember, and certainly we can get back to you with any follow-up that you might have for today. And join us for the future sessions. The first session was on really the relationship building. Today was specifically about budgets and evaluation, and there'll be more in this series. So
Hmm.
please join us and pass it on to others that you think could benefit.
Thank you all. Enjoy your day. It was really great. I love the chat. Just to echo what Nanci said. Thank you so much for the conversation. Really great to be in company with all of you today.